The small utilities, these rural co-ops, often get left behind because they don't have the resources, they don't know where to go. And the goal here is to take the smarts of folks that are already deeply embedded in this work and share it so that we can get to a point where 3,200 utilities and let's just say 10 million fleet operators and charging operators know how to find each other in the GridFAST tool.
Ready or not, electric vehicle adoption is happening in America. It feels like we've reached an inflection point, especially as range increases. EVs are simply proving to be a better mousetrap, and now there's a race coast to coast to bulk up the charging infrastructure needed to enable not only the cars that you and I might drive, but the scaling of fleets and long-haul trucking. And that's no easy thing to figure out because developers have got to work closely with utilities to bring these big power-sucking sites online without overtaxing the local grid. And since everybody needs power yesterday, there's also a timeliness component to this. And we all know that time means money. The Electric Power Research Institute, better known as EPRI, is taking on the challenge of connecting the dots and facilitating a planning process for such deployment of EV charging projects. On this episode, I'm joined by EPRI Director of Transportation, Britta Gross, to discuss GridFAST, a central secure portal that's designed to improve communication between stakeholders, bringing them together early on to ensure everyone gets what they want when they want it, or as close to it as possible. I'm Paul Gerke, and you're listening to Factor This. Are you wondering how utilities in the Northeast United States are tackling problems like load growth, grid reliability, and sustainability? Don't miss the last DTEC event of the year, DTEC Northeast, November 17th through 19th in Boston, Massachusetts. There's a 10% discount code on factorthis.com in the post containing this podcast. Check it out, and we'll see you in November. In today's day and age, as you probably hear often on this show, collaboration and cooperation are two of the most important words that we throw around as our energy ecosphere evolves, and it's more important for utilities and other various stakeholders to break out of their classic silos and work together to get stuff done. And one of the ways in which that's happening right underneath our feet right now is with our friends over at EPRI. You may remember them from the Climate Ready episode earlier this year on Factor This. They've got another program that they want to talk about that's making a major impact in the way that we're adopting EV charging projects in the United States. It's called GridFAST. And to talk about it, I'm joined by Britta Gross, the Director of Transportation over at EPRI. Britta, really appreciate your time.
You bet. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so let's talk about the program a little bit. Give us the nuts and bolts. I explained it a little bit a second ago in the show intro, but you know this way better than I do. What's it all about?
So I think it's really important to look at sort of the bigger umbrella program where GridFAST lies. We started about 3 years ago and recognized that there were going to be some real challenges about scaling up electrification and interconnections of vehicles to the grid if we didn't start to rethink the processes and tools behind all these industries that are involved, right? And so if you think back again, the program, the 3-year initiative is EVs to Scale 2030. We put a stake in the ground in 2030. Remember, this is 3 years ago, and said to achieve the kind of goals and ambitions in 2030 there was an awful lot of alignment, right? Federal governments, many state governments, fleet operators, automakers, truck makers. There was a lot of alignment in the thinking of, okay, this is happening. Let's put a stake in the ground. And if those numbers start to happen, these very large, widespread electrification numbers of cars, buses, and trucks, can we do it? Can the utility industry get there just, with current resources, current processes, and so on? And so we came up with several deliverables, several very key elements of the program. One of which was really, I have to kind of start with eRoadmap. eRoadmap was a tool that's publicly available. Your listeners can get out there and look at eRoadmap. I think it's eroadmap.epri.com or .epri.com. You guys can clarify that afterwards. But it was very intentional. We needed a public tool that would be fun to use It's a mapping tool and would integrate the best data available out there, real data from what Amazon's doing and FedEx and PepsiCo and what Daimler and Volvo and Navistar and PACCAR, where their trucks go today, where do they pick up packages and drop off packages. And all of this data is boiled into the public-facing tool called eRoadmap. GridFAST, that we're going to talk about today, was sort of the parallel tool, but it is a secure tool that then allows not just a broad discussion of where and when loads show up on the grid, but securely let fleet operators and charging operators talk to the one utility they're trying to reach about a load that's coming 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, even 20 years. Let's prepare the utility industry like never before. And as you know, and I think every one of your listeners knows, there are 3,200 utilities in this country. And so a large fleet operator that has 400 sites around the country has to deal with upwards of 400 utilities. And they have not only different regulatory environments, but different processes, different tools, different systems. Many are digitized more than others, but they also have different vocabulary. It's as basic as vocabulary. So GridFAST is the sort of the secure tool that sort of goes along with eRoadmap to start to hammer away at this issue of where and when are loads coming so that utilities and their regulators and boards behind them can better prepare for the loads that are coming across the United States.
We're going to sink our teeth a lot deeper into that slice of cake, but I want to back up just a little bit and tip my hat to you for saying something about the frustrations behind utilities having lack of common definitions. We talk a lot about the engineering and the how is this going to work and can we get this project interconnected and all that, but when you really sort of pare back some of the problems that we face right now in this energy transition, time and time again, we come up to these simple people problems where it's like, I can't get in touch with the right person. This utility uses a different word for the same thing that this other utility uses. We had a contributed article on Factor this not that long ago from Dr. Michael Weber and his cohorts over at the UT of Austin that was about exactly that. Utilities don't share a common definition for resilience. So throughout this stakeholder process, you're obviously working with disparate groups across the country who are using different definitions and aren't used to working with each other. What was that process like, and what were some of the largest challenges that you faced in getting all of those hands to work together?
So I'm just going to say it boils down to trust. So I've been in the industry, I've been in this part of the industry, sort of electric and hydrogen vehicles. I've been in this part of the industry in my career for 20 years. And I come out of the auto industry and got to know my role was really looking at the widespread electrification of electric and hydrogen vehicles and who you partner with, how much energy, how do you produce hydrogen? How do you produce electricity? What do we need for policies and regulations? And then just charging infrastructure, what's home, what's public, what's workplace. And so coming here to EPRI and working with the utility industry then more closely. I will also mention in my spare time, I'm on a board of a municipal utility here in Florida, but sort of taking all these pieces together where I've been in the industry. I have a little bit of trust built up, as does the entire team at EPRI. And we have been able to sort of work because we understand the language of the other industries, the fleet operators, the truck manufacturers and the car manufacturers. That was really critical to being able to open the door a little bit wider in the utility industry and vice versa, being deeply entrenched in the utility industry and then going over to these folks to say, it's really not going to work at scale if we can't find a place in the middle where we can operate more effectively. And I want to go back to one of your points that was really important. You talked about sort of people in the process, how different it is. And I want to sort of emphasize that point. We have gotten to this place in the market. I mean, I watched for many, many years, starting in maybe 2002, 3, 4, 5, and all the way through to even more recently, where we saw only 1% or 1.5% of new vehicle sales were electric of some sort, plug-in hybrid or pure battery electric vehicle. And now we are seeing enormous success, right? California just reported almost, I think, 29%, almost 30% new vehicle sales in the state of California now so far in 2025 are electric. How did we get from 1% to like 30%. And on average across the country, it's about 10%. 1 in 10 cars across the country are electric right now. How do we do that? Well, I will just say a lot of that, especially in all of the early years, was personality driven. You knew the guy or gal over at that utility that just was making it happen through sheer will. You knew the person at an automaker or at the truck maker or at this fleet operator. And these personalities made this market kind of happen and got it to where we are. But widespread electrification, when you're talking 30% of sales are electric in California and 10% nationwide, as those numbers creep up, the resources required to do that can no longer just count on one personality driven person. It has got to turn into a process driven by really best practices and so on. So I want to make sure that's really part of this discussion too, because it's really, I can't overstate. We've got to get to a point. It doesn't sound very exciting, but just there are not enough of us to make this happen, in the most cost-effective, efficient way. And so process-driven is going to have to be where the name of the game is.
I feel like the typical sentiment from a utility on that point would be, yeah, we know that this doesn't work at scale. Like we know from the other side of the aisle that, people in my shoes especially are always, beating the drum of like, this isn't going fast enough. Interconnection queues aren't moving, and we're not getting. I mean, and you can apply that to anything, EV charging all the way up to utility scale solar. And I think utilities are now acutely in 2025 Q4 pretty aware that to do this at scale, they're going to have to grow. I want to step back just a little bit though with you, Britta, and talk about how this impacts individual states, because not every single state in the U.S. has ambitious EV charging initiatives, obviously. Not everyone is trying to get a bunch of EV charging attached to their grid. However, I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 24 or so states plus Washington, D.C. that have, electric vehicle standards that they're trying to get to. Can you talk to me a little bit about how adoption has been received in various regions in the U.S. and how that becomes an obstacle or maybe an asset to you?
So I think that regulations are really important in the beginning of a transition because there's an awful lot of uncertainty in adoption, uncertainty in how much charging infrastructure you really need, et cetera. When we're hitting these numbers, 10% nationwide portion of EV sales out of all vehicle sales, and upwards of 30% in California, and there are other places in the country. I mean, Washington D.C. is a hotbed also for electric vehicles. But I think what's really important is the electric vehicles are really terrific. And when you start to hit those kinds of numbers, then more and more people actually realize, oh, okay, now I've taken a test drive. Okay, now I know what you guys are talking about. This isn't just a regulated effort anymore. The vehicles are better. They are better to drive. They have better ride and handling. They're quiet. They have great acceleration. And they're cheaper to drive on electricity than comparable gasoline.
The better mousetrap, right?
It's a better mousetrap. And so, where earlier on regulations made a really important difference. And we'd like to see more continuity and just sort of stabilize everything that goes on, because these investments are really big by the automakers and the truck makers and fleets and others as well. These are really large, maybe risky, big investments in batteries and onshoring of rare earth mineral processing, et cetera. So, but what I want to say is the adoption now, and even going backwards, I mean, Texas and Florida have a larger numbers of EV adoption than in many other areas in the country. And Texas and Florida have done almost nothing sort of in the regulatory space or in the incentive space to actually help move this along. So you can see how just consumers make the difference. Consumers, that if you can just sort of get one neighbor to get into an electric vehicle, and then the other neighbors, why are you doing that? What's that cable to your garage? Like, what's going on there? Oh, I'm charging. It's wonderful. Like, yeah, oh, here, just drive this thing. And so I think that it's sort of a balance. I'm not too worried right now about what's going on. Some of the trucking stuff, of course, it would have been, we sort of didn't get our teeth in deep enough yet. So that we've got to look at. But not only is it sort of the consumers want these vehicles and there's just no stopping that, but also the economics are turning. And the economics of driving on electric, it was already cheaper to operate an electric vehicle, there are just many fewer repairs, operating costs are much lower, but then also the fuel costs. Just again, it's about 1/3 the cost of driving on gasoline. 1/3 the cost of driving on gasoline. And so just economics and consumer excitement over the drive, including truck driver excitement over the drive and handling of these vehicles and the safety of these vehicles, is going to make the difference. So I would just sort of boil it all down to there are other motivations now that are leading the way.
I'm curious to get your opinion on something. I wrote an article a couple of years ago written from the perspective of an EV charging developer who said something to the effect of, and I'm paraphrasing here, but EV charging depots will never replace gas stations. Like this, we're never going to be in a world where you pull into a Shell and charge for 10 minutes and go inside and buy a soda and use the bathroom and have the same consumer experience. Now, that is not the only viewpoint of that take. There are a lot of people now, as technology, especially in fast charging, has improved, who are back on the other side of that, and they're saying, no, it's pretty much going to be replacing gas stations. But there are people that believe very polar opposites about what our EV charging future looks like. What do you think it looks like?
So, great question. I'm just going to start with the easy stuff. 80% of Americans travel less than 40 miles a day. 80% of us travel less than 40 miles a day. I have been driving EV, you too. I have been driving EVs since 2010 December, but maybe even for sure 2011. I still use a 120 volt outlet in my garage to not only charge my car, but my daughter's cars as well. So electric cars. So let's just start off with like the reality. 120 volt plugs in your garage. You don't have to do anything. Just plug in your cable that comes with the car, plug it in, and you're good if you're like me and Paul, and we don't travel a lot of miles every day. Now, yes, there are folks that can't charge at home. There are folks that, Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, that travel, 400 miles, 500 miles a day doing their business, etc. And so we do need a fast charging network. And those are happening. I guess I'll just point to the success of the Tesla network and how important it was for that brand to say that it can be done. It was more challenging for the other automakers to figure out how do they standardize what they're looking for in the interconnection with a fast charging station. It's a lot more difficult. The vehicles are designed all differently, batteries are different, et cetera, et cetera. But that is coming along too. If you look at what Iona is doing, right? There are a bunch of automakers have pumped money into a company called Iona, and they are building a widespread national network of fast charging stations that have amenities, lighting and canopy and stores and kiosks and Wi-Fi. So you can do your work sitting there too if it takes more than 10 minutes to charge your car. So it just sort of, this was a learning part of the industry. But I'll just say, for anyone out there listening, don't get lost in the worst problem to have to solve, like trucks trying to deliver your household goods from Seattle to Orlando. And then tomorrow that driver has to go to Maine and then down to Texas. That is a very difficult business. That is a very difficult case for batteries today. But of the light duty vehicles that we all drive, again, 80% of us don't drive more than 40 miles a day. Be realistic about what you need. First of all, start easy. And then in the last mile delivery case, look at what Amazon's doing. Amazon already has 30,000 last mile delivery vans. Maybe many of you have seen them at your doorsteps. I see them in my neighborhood now in Orlando, Florida. Amazon is not the only one. They are now on their path to get 100,000 of these vans complete last mile delivery fleet. So just there are business cases for the more obvious to solve segments of the car and truck and bus segments. So let's start there. Charging infrastructure is coming along, but don't overstate what let's remember, you may be one of the ones that are lucky like me and I can just do it in my driveway. I park in the driveway and my cord extends underneath the door over to my outlet and no problem, no electrician, fine.
Let's talk a little more about GridFAST. So this portal is designed to sort of improve communication between these otherwise disparate parties, businesses and utilities, etc. to facilitate getting these EV charging projects online, what I would assume is faster and more streamlined and efficient. How does that exactly work? And does it work for all size customers? Can you be a small business that's trying to install 4 fast chargers for your employees, or are you an Amazon calling and saying we want a lot with 100 megawatts? All parties welcome here?
Yeah. All parties are welcome, big and small customers, and we definitely have big and small utilities. The key here is not the size of your load, but it's the aggregated effect of your load plus Amazon's load plus FedEx plus what the transit agency is doing with their transit buses plus what the school district is doing. All these loads add up somewhere on a utility's circuit or a substation, etc. And when you add up this effect, and when you can see far enough into the future, oh, look at what all of these fleets, it looks like, are doing 5 years from today. Not maybe today exactly, but in 5 years. Okay, now they're starting to add up on my system. I'm starting to see like 2-3 megawatts needed on a circuit. And therefore, I, the utility, have a better ability now to either go talk to my regulator about the need to start proactively prepare for loads that are coming, or talk to my city council or board, whoever regulates my utility, so that the utility can better manage and plan ahead, because planning ahead and addressing aggregate loads, all these different loads added together from different customers, that is the way to keep costs down. Because what happens today is it's sort of, you have to queue up in these service request processes with utilities, a very regulated process with utilities. And so if I just wait for a service request, then I submit my form, I'm a fleet operator, and the utility has to address my service request application. If 6 months later, another service request comes in from another fleet operator or the transit agency or someone else, now I'm addressing that customer's need. And that means for 6 months, I didn't anticipate both happening, and maybe I could have saved an awful lot of money, ratepayer money maybe also included here, and I could have kept costs down because I would have said, oh, I'm going to just plan ahead while I'm digging ground. I'm just going to go ahead and lay a bigger cable. So that's the beauty of getting early information. Again, GridFAST is designed for years ahead planning. We're not trying to compete with service request forms. It's years ahead planning to say, here's what I'm planning over the next 5 or 10 years, so that you can plan ahead and think about all of our loads coming together. Think about that advantage for utility. We don't have a system like that today. We certainly don't have a system anywhere where you can upload your information in a secure system and reach exactly the one utility of the 3,200 that is serving the location of your site. And they can be on guard and aware now of what's going to happen with, when your load is planned in 5 years or 8 years or whenever it is.
So I have a question. We talk a lot about interconnection queues on the show and on the site. And one of the problems that RTOs have with, and utilities have with those queues, is that there are ghost projects. There are speculative, hey, we're going to do this, maybe we're not, maybe we'll have a better interconnection somewhere else, maybe we'll be able to get a comparable size load in MISO instead of where we were looking. How is this any different? How does a utility actually look at 5 years out of EV charging adoption plans, not knowing where policy is headed and not really knowing where consumer adoption is headed, although granted, it seems very clear we're headed in a certain direction now, and still be able to hold themselves and ratepayers accountable for construction projects that might end up stranded transmission?
Yeah, that's great. So where data centers, maybe I'll just start with the last little thing you said and go backwards. Data centers really affect generation and transmission. That's really what affects that part of the market. When we talk about transportation, we're really talking about the distribution system. It's more local. It might impact, of course, the substation, but it's sort of like outwards then to the distribution circuits. So that's a starting point. Back to your point then about it's a regulated process. How does this help? And confidence. So when we designed GridFAST, we talked to really a lot of the leading fleet operators that really were the leaders, the ones that are really determining how fast this is going to go, how fast the electric transition is going to go in transportation. We talked to a lot of the leading utilities. We talked to a lot of the leading charging operators, and we asked them all this question. And that theme that you just brought up came up a lot. You got speculators, maybe the programs drop off the piece of paper, maybe they don't. One thing that we've built into GridFAST is two aspects. One is we ask the customer that enters the project, and now that you've entered that address, that site, and what you estimate the load to be in 3 years, 4 years, 8 years, whatever, we ask them, so what's your confidence level? Now, it's up to the person to be as straightforward and honest as they can. Are they 25% sure about this actually carrying through? Are they 50% sure, 75% or 100% sure? So that's one way. That's a subjective one, but we wanted to insist that everyone sort of self-manage themselves with a responsibility to communicate, this is 100% given all the funding's in place and this is going forward, or 25% I'm in negotiations with the property owner, I don't know. The second thing that we've done in GridFAST to drive confidence is just simply the essence of GridFAST, and that is when we aggregate the inputs from all these leading fleet operators, the transit agency, the school bus, the school bus agencies inside the education departments, and so on, and the charging operators who still have to kind of look often for sites. And let's just say that I collect 10 inputs that affect sort of these couple circuits over here on the distribution system, and those are in GridFAST now. And let's say that one of those projects drop out. Let's say 2 of them drop out. They just weren't as sure as they thought, or they said they were only 25 or 50% sure, and in fact they did drop out. If we achieve critical mass, I say that word a lot also. If we achieve critical mass in this tool in usage by all customers aggregating and putting their information in there in a secure and confidential way, then we can account for 10%, 20% inaccuracy in the data. Because today, the utilities are blind. They're often operating blind because no one's tried to make this very difficult thing happen. And so we know what we're up against. We know this is really hard, but this is the statistically, significant opportunity of, if we can get to critical mass, some of the projects aren't going to happen, and that might be okay, because maybe if there's aggregate 5 megawatts in this area needed in 5 years, and 1 megawatt just dropped off, there are 4 megawatts that are still needed. So that's how we view confidence, and really avoiding, obviously, every utility wants to avoid, and regulator wants to avoid assets that are not being used. They don't want to invest in an asset that just hangs out there and doesn't get used. All of us want to make sure that doesn't happen. That's not good for anybody, for any of us.
If you're just joining the podcast, I don't know how you did that. You must have fast forward on Spotify or Apple Music or something, but just to level set, I'm Content Director Paul Gerke, speaking with Britta Gross, the Director of Transportation at EPRI. We're talking about their new initiative, GridFAST, which is simplifying the infrastructure deployment process and getting EV charging projects onto the grid faster. Britta, I saw in the guiding principles issued by GridFAST, which I'll link in the article with this podcast on Factor This, that about 15 utilities have signed on to the sort of ethos for what it is you're trying to accomplish. One, what was the process for getting them on board? And two, what was their reaction? There's some pretty big names on that list. Their reaction to what you're doing.
Okay, great. So we thought it was important, because this is really ambitious what we're doing. Again, it's not a surprise that we're doing it. This has been discussed. The complexity of 3,200 utilities, all regulated differently across the country. This has been discussed for decades, right? It's hard if you are a national operator, like a fleet operator. It's very difficult to manage your way through this complex landscape. And so we know that this is a journey. I always hate saying that, but this one's going to take a little bit of time. And so we know that sort of creating some critical mass in different opportune moments is really important. So one thing we thought is that we ought to sort of create a document that captures what we're trying to do here, the essence of what GridFAST is trying to achieve, why we need it, how it was developed, what it's aiming to do, and then who's signing off on this document. And my ambition was, I don't need 3,000 utilities to sign it, and I don't need 50 fleet operators. My goal actually was to get like 10, because it's just everything's time consuming that we're doing, and we're launching this big tool and so on. But I thought, you know what? If I can get 10 companies, leaders, to put their voice behind the guiding principles, and I hope you all read the guiding principles. I think it's a really well-written document. It had a lot of review by the utilities and the fleet operators and the charging operators already participating in GridFAST. And at the end of the day, we ended up with 15 signatures. And I think there are like 5 of those are like key fleet operators, and the other 10 are leading utilities. And so, and I think like Republic Services, IONA, that automaker, invested national charging, public charging network effort. IONA's in there too. Pitt, Ohio has been a real leader in this space for a long time as well as DHL. And so, though, we had sort of customers and utilities. And I think, I'm not going to spend too much more effort getting more on board, although I welcome anyone who wants to also throw their name behind this. The point was to just demonstrate that we're not just a research organization, and in a vacuum, we feel like doing something fun. We are addressing something that has been complained about for decades. Fleet operators and utilities have come together with charging operators also to say, here's what makes interconnections so difficult. And the utilities have just said very clearly, we need to know earlier what you're doing, because it's going to be very difficult with all the other requirements on utilities. And never forget, I try to never forget the role utilities play in our system. Energy is everything. It matters for hospitals and healthcare. It matters for keeping the schools and the lights on. It matters for your business and you being able to do business from home. It's safety, it's security. It matters. And so the utilities' first priority is to keep the grid reliable, keep it resilient so they can get out of problems if there are some real challenges from day to day or month to month. And so that is always foremost in their minds. Keep the grid safe, reliable, and resilient. And so to speed up a process to say, well, I'm going to hand you a service request, and in 6 months, because my electric trucks are coming, I really want you to power me up. And I'm giving you 6 months lead time to do it and interconnect me. That is really difficult. But if that truck operator had told the utility 5 years ahead, in 2025, I am planning to order 5 electric trucks. I will have them before the end of December 2025. Therefore, and I'm expecting this to be a 1.2 megawatt load, that utility can plan like they've never had the ability to plan before. And so then we're back to the ability to aggregate all these loads coming in and planning in advance. So the value of the guiding principles is to know, what the heck are we talking about? What problem is it trying to solve? And I really welcome you all to read it, because we spent painstaking effort to get 15 leaders in industry to sign it off, to make sure it wasn't overstepping on our ability to influence utility processes. That's tough. They have regulated investments in how processes work at utilities and so on. We didn't want to overstep on the customer side with what they are looking for the tool, what they're able to contribute to the tool. And we've come to this very happy middle space, this nice sweet spot that says 15 of us and many more behind that believe we can now start to do this. Again, lots of talk for many years. Can we now start to feed this tool? And that's where we are, and that's the value of the guiding principles.
Talk is one thing, action is another. It might be too early for this, but do you know if there's any emerging use case, a sort of pioneering project that can serve as sort of a bellwether for what's to come using the GridFAST portal?
I don't want to drop names here, not to
I'll
either
plug
embarrass
my ears,
anybody.
don't worry.
Yeah, no one's listening. Let me just say, there's one charging operator who is fully utilizing GridFAST for every project they're doing, everything on the horizon. There is a fleet operator whose programs are now all going into GridFAST. There are many other fleet operators who are they're looking at the market right now too. They're also all adjusting. They're looking at their plans too to make sure that what they enter is reliable information for the utilities. Nobody wants to mislead the utilities. I love the respect everybody has in this relationship. Customers don't want to input bad information, and utilities want to be able to respond with better forecasting and better preparation of plans to address these loads. And so we're right at the point where we've got a lot of fleets about to embrace fully the tool, and we're just sort of right there with the public launch. That was what was needed. The guiding principles was needed to sort of show, yeah, okay, there are folks in. I will just say, as we enter projects, so as customers are entering projects, I just don't want to overstate where we are yet. There are a number of customers now using the tool. As each project gets entered and matched to a utility, only that utility, by the way, knows who that is that entered a project for, this year, next year, 2 years, 8 years from now. It gets matched to a utility. And when that utility is not one of the utilities, I don't know, we work with 50, 100, 150 utilities already. If it's a new utility for us that we don't have a strong relationship with, we actually use this opportunity to reach out and say, hey, we've got this thing called GridFAST. Want you to know about it. Let's walk you through the platform so you see what we're trying to do. And then they become part of the network. And that is happening one utility at a time. And I think we're up to maybe 40 utilities at this point with matched projects. So that's how the system kind of works. That's how it feeds itself. The goal now is to really capture longer lead time plans of some of the biggest fleet operators. So this drives the confidence in the tool, and everyone starts to see more quickly rather than later the real value of what this is going to bring.
I don't want to get too far sidetracked as we're getting a little tight on time toward the end of this, Britta, but I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit about those EV charging sites, because you seem like such an expert on how those loads impact all players. How big are we talking for some of these larger operators now? And are these, always on? Do they have storage on site? I feel like I've seen so many different SKUs of like EV charging, but when we're talking about fleet, there's probably got to be like a good recipe to do this a certain way, right?
Yeah. So, and when you say fleet, you mean like depots, private depots?
Yeah, I'm talking like you're charging more than just a handful of cars at any given time.
Yeah.
And it's something that you're really going to want to tell the utility about, because you're going to be waiting
Yeah.
a long time to get interconnected if you don't.
That's right. So I hate the answer I'm going to give you right now, because like everyone says it, but it's like it is almost always true, right? The world is not black and white. It depends. It depends. So let's break it apart. If you're talking, remember we talked at the very beginning about segmentation of the market and how much easier and cost effective already it is to electrify, let's just say, some parts of the trucking sector. Other parts are going to be tougher a little bit later. Long range, unpredictable route, Class 8 trucks. But the known Class 8 trucks with known Class 8 routes, Class 8 trucks with known routes, and shorter, 2, 3, 4, 500 miles, we can do that now too. But like delivery vans. Delivery vans from the biggest operators that we're working with, all the biggest operators, these last mile trucks that deliver packages. Some of them started with DC fast charging at their depots and quickly learned it's expensive. The utility may not be able to support that load if we're doing just DC fast charging. And oh my, look at that. Level 2, 240 volt, overnight charging works for all these last mile delivery vans. And they've all gone to, and I hope that's not overstating it, some of the big fleets have gone to just level 2 overnight. And that is it adds up if you've got 40, 80, or 120 trucks, of course. But it's not the same as a 1 megawatt DC fast charger that you're trying to work. So it really matters that we parse apart this problem, parse it out. And so look at level 1, 120 volt charging. Look at level 2, perfect answer. Level 2 charging overnight. almost always a valley on the grid where there's plenty of capacity on the grid to serve level 2 overnight charging. The depots where they've got to treat this with DC fast charging. There it depends on where the utility is and how constrained systems are. And I won't give names here either. Some of the utilities in the country deal with very constrained systems. A lot of people want to live there. A lot of people want to work there. And the grids just over time historically have, it's a constrained grid. In other areas where open land and new development and stuff, the utilities typically have much more capacity, newer substations, etc. So to come in and ask for 1 megawatt load, many utilities can achieve that. But if you're asking for 2, 4, 8 megawatts of load, now you're in the realm of, okay, boy, that information should have been in GridFAST like years ago. Yeah. Let's get that information up there so the utility could have known about that load, because they didn't know you were going to be doing DC fast charging. They assumed it might be overnight level 2, 240 volt, whatever. And then to your question about, are there different solutions for these DC chargers and public or private charging? Sure. And the answer is yeah. So if a utility, first of all, utility may be able to just connect you up. It's a newer part of the grid, or they just enhanced capability. They did some proactive investment and they were ready for you. If they can't address your load for 5 years, first of all, always ask the utility, well, could you have given me 1 megawatt instead of the 8 megawatts that I asked for? Can I at least get 1 megawatt? Because maybe that's all I need actually for 5 years. Let's all be a little bit more negotiable. That's a key learning also over the last 5 years. Let's talk to each other about what I need to get started if I'm a fleet operator or charging operator, and then where my load needs to go or anticipates going, and what a utility can do today and what it can do in the future. And so there are options for flexible interconnection if utility is a little bit capacity short. There are PG&E and SCE in California, both two large utilities in California. They both offer flexible interconnection programs where most days of the year you get 100% of what you ask for. But if there are going to be some peak cold mornings or peak hot evenings, or some places where the peak load might stress the grid, it's possible to just sort of negotiate with them ahead of time and say, you know what, I'm going to join your flexible interconnection program, and I recognize that for 2 hours, maybe 4 days a year, I may not get 100% of the load I was looking for, and maybe during those limited hours of a year, I'll get only 60% of what I wanted. And that is a really savvy, smart negotiation. And then you mentioned batteries. Yeah, there are some microgrid solutions. You can take batteries and put them in the spot. That is certainly another opportunity if a fleet operator or a charging operator is anxious to get this in the ground today for marketing purposes or whatever. That is also out there. I won't say that that's standard operating procedure, but that is also, there's a viable pathway there too, and many suppliers out there in that market.
Obviously, this is a huge space, and it sounds like you could talk all day about it. And I love listening, obviously learning a lot here. But to wrap things up and sort of come full circle, we talk a lot about the future, and this whole ethos behind GridFAST is about planning for the future and sort of putting one foot in front of the other in ways that we haven't as we've accelerated on this energy transition. So take me to 5 years from now, that first horizon, let's say 5-year planning process. It's October 2030, and I'm sitting here with Britta, who's now running all of EPRI. Obviously, you've advanced in your career in that span. No, but
sorry, Arshad.
So it's 2030. We're talking again, and we're saying, wow, GridFAST has done this in the last 5 years. What do you hope that is? Is it like wider adoption? Is it just getting to where we need to be? What sort of long-term goals are you looking for?
Yeah, I think we're at the point where scaling what we have now achieved in the 3-year initiative. Again, the 3-year initiative, EVs to Scale 2030, is just under the umbrella of our transportation program. Mm-hmm. And so this initiative is now in its 3rd year. And so that was the intent. We have built 4 major tools and capabilities, and a number of umbrella things around it, like our investigations of flexible interconnection solutions, et cetera. So GridFAST and eRoadmap in particular, this is now scale-up time. Does every regulator, does every utility, does every fleet operator and charging operator understand the value of a public tool to align vocabulary and knowledge about where and when loads come to the grid? And then let's get real and let's have a secure tool that then really gets the details right and allows every fleet operator, large and small, and utility, large and small. Let's make sure there's a system that reaches them. And I will just say to that, the big fleet operators have a lot more resources than the small fleet operators. And so the goal is obviously to make sure that what the leaders and the bigger fleets with more resources have learned, and they have been so good with their time. When I think about what Amazon and FedEx and PepsiCo and others, many others have lent to this effort, they have taught all of us what they had to sort of make their way through, because they do see the value in everyone taking advantage of the lessons they've learned. The utility industry is the same. There are leading utilities that spend a lot of time with EPRI, understanding the research, helping build the tools that can actually change behaviors across industry so that we can knock out some of these bigger challenges that just have been taught for a long time. The small utilities, these rural co-ops, often get left behind because they don't have the resources, they don't know where to go. And the goal here is to take the smarts of folks that are already deeply embedded in this work and share it so that we can get to a point where 3,200 utilities, and let's just say 10 million fleet operators and charging operators, know how to find each other in the GridFAST tool.
That is an excellent thesis statement, Britta. And if you're listening to this podcast, that's the quote that I put at the very beginning of the show. You waited the entire show to hear it again because that was the winner right there. She put it in a sentence for you. Britta Gross, Director of Transportation at EPRI. I really appreciate you taking some time to chat with me like this. Learned a ton from you and can't wait to see where this is headed. And hopefully we can get a ton more EV charging connected to the grid as soon as possible.
Thank you, Paul. It was really a pleasure being here with you. It was great talking to you.
Thank you so much, Britta. If you enjoyed the show, took some value out of it, please click the like button or subscribe to hear future episodes. If you hated the show, go ahead and send me something in my inbox. By the time you're listening to this, I'm on paternity leave, so I'm not going to see it until 2026. Say whatever you want, but make sure you say nice things about Britta. She was great. Take care, everybody. We'll catch you next time on another edition of the Factor This podcast.
Thanks, everybody.